I think I mentioned about the methodology to spell out how you to manage a project, looking at the monitoring, the calculation, etc. But importantly, that you must meet all natural regional resource management plans. So that'd be the Lodd and Mallee regional catchment strategy, I think it is in this region. But it also is government plans, local government planning requirements. It might be emergency services or essential services distribution easements. It might be EPA plans, it might be National Water Initiative plans. You have to meet them all, and you have to provide a statutory declaration that you've actually met those requirements to avoid any sort of perverse outcomes. So things like, again on the negative list, you can't go and plant trees that are a known weed species, all right, in your region. So you have to prove that the tree you've got's not on that declared weeds list. And for sequestration projects, there's a couple of other things that occur. You have to have a notification of consent of all land parties. Anyone with a vested interest in the land has to okay the project. Now, there's a couple of very big people or very big organisations that have a say in that. Does anyone want to venture a guess as to who it is? The banks. Definitely. If you've got a mortgaged property and you want to undertake a sequestration project, you need to get the bank to sign off on it. So there might be a process of actually educating the bank, because the bank sees it as an asset and they want to know what the liabilities are or what changes you're making to it, or your ability to repay the loan. And that will be the notification will be put on the project on the land title. Now, the CFI is a little different to all other ones, that if you grow your carbon on, and particularly in revegetation activities, and the carbon's lost, the government will come back and say, well, you know, you need to make good the loss. Whilst as a project proponent or someone who actually undertakes it, such as a carbon pool manager, that's the first point of call, whoever had the certificates issued to them. The ultimate risk runs with the land. Because of this 100-year rule, it has to run with the title of the land, has to survive transfer of ownership through succession plans or sales or whatever it may be. So a notification is put on title. At this stage, it's just a simple, there is a sequestration project on title and the government's going to put that on your behalf. And then the person who purchases the property, who's looking to get the property, will then have to go and find out what are the implications of that carbon sequestration project. But because that 100-year rule is going to outlive anybody in this room, we have, well, I think everybody in this room, is you have to have it registered on title and it runs with a title. So that might have an effect on your property prices later. The government does have this thing called a risk of reversal buffer as well, where if you do have an event such as a fire or another depletion event through your vegetation, or a drought reduces some of the soil carbon, is that they'll actually keep 5% of all the issued credits as this sort of national insurance scheme. So that you can, that risk of reversal buffer allows you a little bit of time to recover from depletion events. And I'll mention that on this slide, because one of the key things we can do at the moment is forestry, all right? It's pretty straightforward. It's a bit of a no-brainer. We've been doing it in this country for many, many years. And I'm talking about carbon sequestration projects. So the basic rules for this is that if you want to undertake a carbon forestry project or a forest sink, you need to do it on certain types of land. And that land has to have been 80% clear of vegetation on the 31st of December 1989, or legally cleared afterwards. All right, and you have to prove this legally cleared. I can tell you that the burden of proof is always on the project proponent. You know, the government is very good at telling you what to do, but not how to do it. So you'll have to find these provisions of proof. It has to have been clear for at least 5 years prior to planting, usually 7 years. And it has to be revegetated after the 1st of the 7th, 2007. Now, it could have been revegetated before that, but you'll have to provide evidence or proof that it was done for greenhouse gas abatement purposes, which will require the registration of carbon rights. That's in the regulations. All right? So whoever didn't do that is going to have trouble proving that they actually did this for greenhouse gas abatement purposes. If you're in another scheme, you can transfer from other schemes as well. It has to be revegetated by human-induced means. And this is all based on the permanent environmental plantings. It has to be revegetated by human-induced means, which means direct seeding or planting. Natural regrowth will be eligible, we believe. It's eligible in the regulations and the legislation, but we don't have a methodology for it yet. I know it's coming, I know it's been submitted, and we hope to see it in the next couple of months. At maturity, the trees have to reach 2 metres in height and 20% closure. And to get a scope on that 20% on closure, you're talking if a tree's got a 5 metre crown, 5 metre diameter crown, you're talking about 110, maybe 120 stems per hectare. Right, so it's not a huge burden to get that 20%. And most vegetation in this region meets that easily. And it has to have an area greater than 0.2 of a hectare, which is about half an acre. All right, so it's not a huge area, but I can tell you, I don't know that sort of area would be viable in this region. Under the methodology as well, you have to keep grazing out for 3 years. You can pick up 10% of the firewood for domestic uses off the property, and you have to plant a mix of overstory and understory trees that are native to the area. All right? There are lots of smaller rules in there as well. But if you do go in and harvest a forestry plantation, and the permanent environmental planting methodology doesn't allow harvesting, but if you do harvest a plantation, it's treated as an emission at the point of harvest. So if you cut the tree down, that's it. It's considered the emission has gone straight back into the atmosphere as though it was eaten by termites before it hit the ground. All right, we don't have any recognition of end of forest product uses. So we don't recognise what's been stored in trees, stored in furniture or in house frames or anything else like that. There's a lot of reasons for that we can address later, but it's essentially an accounting nightmare. As mentioned, the carbon must remain on site for 100 years. So if you're thinking about these things, as again why I advocate whole farm planning, make sure you're putting them in the right spot. All right, there's always somewhere to put some trees on a property. And if you are unfortunate enough to have a fire or another depletion event, it doesn't mean someone in a black limousine in black suits with a black bag is going to come up and say, give me my carbon back. All right, you've got 10 years for it to recover or to be on the road to recovery. And most native species or most native vegetation in Australia has some capacity to respond from fire or is a bit adapted to fire. So you've got this 10 years to recover, and this is where they keep that risk reversal buffer thing. And they keep it there so that whilst it's recovering, you can't create any more income from it. What it really means is that you cannot sell any more carbon from the site until you reach your pre-depletion event status. So if I had 100 tonnes on site, fire came through, took out 30 tonnes, it took 5 years for it to start regrowing again, I'm fine. It might take another 10 years before I get to 101 tonnes, but that means I can't sell until I get to that 101st tonne again. I've got to make good all my losses first. All right, so again, it gets back to that concept that every issued certificate must be backed by an equivalent quantity of carbon on site.